在下面留言对这件事的看法，就是让更多人能够关注到这件事情来，都是有帮助的。那最新的消息呢？中国的流浪气球被美军给打下来了。但是此前中国的媒体在渲染说美国没有这个实力，没有这个能力。我们就看看1天前呢，甚至中国的媒体还不承认这是中国的官方的媒体不承认，直到外交部出来澄清了，的确是我们的。然后媒体的口径又180度大转弯。
What planet is that?
像是这样的新闻呢，就非常的打脸，很多呢现在已经被删除了，这个是我当时截图下来的。那还有像是承认了之后呢，大家又开始变相的洗地有些新闻就说拜登为啥不击落小破球，真正的原因呢是根本打不到就是嘲笑美国没有这个技术。那直到昨天中国官方已经承认了，又直到今天美国又将它击落了，还是有一些中国小粉在那边狂命的拼命的洗地。我们就一起来看看他怎么洗地。那其中就有新浪微博的网友留言来说，刚刚外交部已经承认了，确实是我们的飞艇。大家看一下新闻，不要弄巧成拙，给外国人递刀子送笑料。我们现在重心是质疑美国为什么这么敏感，在害怕什么这位小粉也知道，他的伙伴他的同伴这些小粉就是弄巧成拙嘛，都在出洋相。他就你看比较聪明一点，就出来向大家制止大家要看一下新闻。你看他说了，大家看一下新闻，不要弄巧成拙，给外国人递刀子送笑料。之前也以为不是中国的，现在看来也对，毕竟是中国的嘛，所以美国不敢打下来，哈哈哈哈，伤害性不大，侮辱性极强。就我看来，美国炒作自己，把自己扮成受害者的样子，博同情罢了。你倒是击落他呀，打下来呀。我就爱看美国想打却又打不下来的样子。那接下来还有网友说，我国科研气球能继续横行美国有2点原因。第一，美国还没有这个能力和技术。
加油。
你现在在看什么中美关系
对啊。
Arian 不是说要抓外挂吗？
那
伺服器被炸了。
哪一个？
你不在，就是之前他们国中的伺服器，然后你知道原本只有大概，然后6、7、8个人吧。你猜现在有多少？现在有700多个人。
这有相关吗？
有啊，他那个写外挂的那个人，把那个伺服器连接传到挂群，然后挂群有线进来，然后有人在里面写机器人，然后加了700多个机器人进来。
这么牛，
很猛，他连 DC 都很 high。
对啊，
我是觉得没差，反正这是小群被炸没差。
对啊。
但是我觉得这整件事情最奇怪的就是，Rian 跟别人说，因为他应该没有跟挂群的人说过话，但是他是跟别人检举这个伺服器。但是那个他的私讯内容就被截图了，我觉得怪怪的。
我告诉你，因为那个 DC 它其实没有隐私的，就它做这个城市的方式，还有它后台进去的方式，就是你后台进去，它就会可以看到所有的东西了。所以其实 DC 它是很好害的，所以你就之前有看过那种点一个图片就会被害的那一种。
哦，
对，因为 DC 它其实就是一个浏览器，就是一个改造过的浏览器，所以 DC 其实很好被害的。至于他确切怎么找到核源伺服器的，那我也不知道啊。
不是他找到核认伺服器，核认伺服器这个已经不重要，重点是他能看到核认跟别人私讯的内容。
对啊，但应该是有别人通知他们吧？
没有，他有截图，他直接是一个截图。他直接截核认跟别人私讯的那个，但是重点是我就是不知道核认私讯的是谁，我要请那边跟我讲。
啊哈，
我想说，如果就是何润可能跟别人讲，因为何润跟我说，他有跟吴伟跟詹皮讲过了。我有一个很疯狂的想法，就是说，搞不好你们自产自销。
不一定啊。
对，我也觉得不一定，我只是
偏
疯狂的想法。哎，我早就跟他说不要查了。
没关系啊，没有大损失就好了，不要炸到我这边就行。
确实，我也没有让他炸到 A 配去。我只希望他应该是不会爆气的，反正就是小群而已。
对啊，小群而言，爆气。
可是他很容易太认真。我就觉得没差，我觉得 A 配群就算被炸掉也没差，我们都有好友。
对啊，
反正不会玩的，不会跟我们玩的，就是不会跟我们玩。
对啊。
这种东西就是 Gmail 再申请一个你的 DC A 配账号，就可以再多一个，他们根本没差。
对啊，他们自己开就算了啊，你想要怎么做啊？对啊，你
我就觉得根本没
说，
差。
对啊，
遇到这种人，人是认
把
倒。
人放进去当卧底，那就算了吧。但是
我现在是卧底啊，但是
你如果是跟如果是跟什么管理员那种讲，也比较有用，因为可能他们来卧底，可能抓到些什么有的没的。
那可能要联络 DC 官方人员
对啊，
我不想管，让何人去弄就好。
对啊，我也不想管，感觉这
我觉得
个浑
这懒得
水堂的没
管。
好处啊。
对啊，就是你管了，他们还是会散播，这跟病毒一样啊。
嗯，
好了，我要走了，反正我该告诉何瑞的我就跟他讲了。我刚刚说伺服器被炸，然后叫他确认一下私讯内容而已，就这样。
拜拜。
好了，拜了，我明天要早起。
哦。
将它有效的击落。第二，也是最主要的原因，就是那颗大气球是中国的，这是关键，美国也不敢得罪我们。如果是其他国家，早就打下来了。但是你这个讲的话，不就前后矛盾了吗？
等一下，
你说美国没有这个打下来的技术，但你后面又说啊，这个如果是外国的，美国早就打下来。还有网友说，现在最尴尬的应该是美国想击落又不敢击落，就算敢击落又没有这个技术，哈哈哈哈！最喜欢看美国这种尴尬场面，也只有中国能让美国陷入窘境。到底谁比较尴尬？如果真的像你说的一样，站在技术的角度啊，说美国没有技术、没有能力把它打下来，很尴尬啊。最尴尬的应该是你吧？你制造了它，还没有能力去控制它，还说什么不可抗力因素？到底谁比较尴尬？喜欢我的频道，请记得帮我按赞、留言，一定要开启小铃铛哦。另外，你可以透过加入频道会员以及影片下方的超级感谢，包括不略过广告、观看一遍赞助频道。你的中国好朋友陈老师，我们下期见。
Forspoken 魔咒之地何止不被看好，在发售前更充满了危险的信号。去年8月份在 Twitter 上公布30秒的宣传短片，搭配女主角的口白，还被许多玩家吐槽滑稽又浮夸。女主角在预告片中以惊讶的口吻说道
So let me get this straight. I'm somewhere that's not what I would call Earth. I'm seeing freaking dragons, and oh yeah, I'm talking to a cop. Yeah, okay, that is something I do know.
这尴尬的台词像是激发了网友们的创造欲，各种恶搞作品层出不穷。许多玩家模仿了女主夸张的说话方式，并套用在其他游戏上。其中 Bloodborne 的恶搞作品还吸引了超过50万的观看。在 Reddit 上也有玩家认为效仿 Marvel 的自嘲方式，让人看得尴尬癌发作。
Not like I wanted to get caught stealing the car, but here we are.
去年年底试玩版本应该要提升买气，却起到了反效果，被玩家嫌弃女主角 Frey 的个性完全不讨喜，战斗没什么难度，重复性还高，开放世界的设计也空洞无趣。面对大多负面的评价 ，Square Enix 也出面保证游戏最终的体验会更好、更完整，还很反常的为了 Demo 推出了更新档，新增一系列提升玩家体验的功能。讽刺的是，玩家并没有因此对游戏改观。在 Forspoken 上市之际 ，Square Enix 还公布了超高要求的 PC 配置，想要以 4K 60 FPS 畅玩，甚至直接开到了 GTX 4080。这块在几个月前根本还没推出性能超强的显卡，许多玩家怀疑 Square Enix 可能根本没做好移植，甚至可以说是完全没有优化。在游戏发售后，事实证明 PC 版的运行效果一塌糊涂。在 Steam 目前2000多篇褒贬不一的评价中，很多都反映了优化相关的问题，甚至有玩家表示3070的显卡在不开光追 1080p 的解析度，其他特效开满的情况下，大部分战斗都还是低于60 FPS。也有玩家直接建议没有3060以上的显卡可以直接忽略别玩。虽然我在 PS5 上以效能模式游玩，帧数还算可以，但画面真的糊到有点鬼扯，动态解析度有时甚至会降到720p。不光如此 ，Square Enix 躲躲藏藏的宣传，更让玩家们对游戏产生怀疑。不仅在发售前没什么大规模的行动 ，SE 更限制了评测序号的发放。VGC 的总编 Andy Robinson 就在 Twitter 上表示自己没有收到序号，还补充这个情况非常罕见。其他媒体和 YouTuber 也纷纷表示自己也同样没有 key。虽说不发序号可能有其他原因，并不一定代表游戏有多糟糕，但就如同 Twitter 用户所言，不发序号给媒体不是比负评还要更糟吗？这不就证明游戏有更严重的问题想要隐瞒吗？然而在我玩过游戏后，我才理解 Square Enix 的用心良苦。 Forspoken 是一款结合魔法和跑酷的开放世界游戏，故事讲述生活在纽约的女主角 Frey 意外穿越到受魔女统治的亚细亚大陆，在充满危险的魔法世界中寻找回家的道路。在旅途中 Frey 结识了会说话的神秘手铐。
Cuff? That's a bit reductive, isn't it? Cuff? Go on then, maybe. Vambrace. Oh, Vambrace. Vambrace.
他不只提供 Frey 如同撒亮片般的华丽招式、飞檐走壁的能力，两人还一路打嘴炮，误打误撞成为拯救世界的反英雄。穿越剧不玩点新花招，其实很难抓人眼球。好在 Forspoken 的世界观还算完整有趣，而主线的故事铺陈也让人好奇，像是 Frey 手上的手铐到底是谁？统治世界的魔女为什么会忽然反目成仇？为何女主是穿越时空的天选之人？等等。不过角色塑造和对白的编写实在让人不敢恭维，在编写剧情上的细节也不是很仔细，好比在一开始 Frey 好不容易存了一笔钱，打算用它来过新生活，不过当晚却遭仇家放火，情急之下 Frey 选择先去救一旁的小猫，让整袋钱就这样被烧光光。我理解制作组是想要借此传达 Frey 其实是个内心善良的好人，但钱就在旁边的大姐，你完全可以顺手背起来再去找猫，却硬要搞得好像只能救猫和拿钱之间做选择。对白也写得超级尴尬，被网友戏称为 Whedon 式对白。
With my mind.
I just keep hearing I.
I just moved it with my freaking mind.
Forbes 的文章就很好的解释，这是一种在漫威电影常用的搞笑写法，角色会很自觉地吐槽自己的处境，但同时又会继续演下去。好比在复仇者联盟中，鹰眼会埋怨自己只拿弓箭去打机器人军团很不现实，但下一秒又扭头回去拉弓。这种写作风格在早期或许还能博人一笑，不过到了现在却有点陈腔滥调，让人看得莫名火大。刚来到异世界的女主会不断用这种方式说话，个性还非常屁孩，对友善的陌生人没礼貌，看不顺眼就开骂，动不动就想逃避现实。虽然她最后有所成长，但这种人设难以产生同理心。玩到后面，我甚至怀疑制作组对于共鸣的定义是不是跟我想的不太一样。明明游戏就有不错的故事和完善的世界观，但不知道为什么总是要让主角去花式吐槽自己的设定，让严肃的时刻变得莫名尴尬，让热血的 moment 变得傻里傻气。与其这样乱搞，倒不如循规蹈矩的讲故事。作为在2023年发售的 3A 大作 Forspoken 在很多时候都看起来像 PS 时代的游戏，虽然色彩缤纷的魔法效果看起来华丽酷炫，却难以掩饰粗糙的建模和低像素的地形贴图。与2020年公布的首支预告片相比，简直天差地远，不管是贴图、光影效果还是细节层次都大幅缩水，外加单调的运镜和只会拿黑画面来做转场的手法，让人玩的真的超级难受。不开玩笑，我这只有4分钟的片段 Forspoken 就用了4遍的黑画面当转场。更恼火的是，每段过场结束，主角都得站在原地罚站，只能等到对白完全结束才能重新控制角色。魔法战斗和跑酷是 Forspoken 的2大卖点，而确实也是这款游戏中最好玩的部分。战斗打法可以很多元，招式种类多变，还能解锁不同元素的能力，像是一开始提供的火属性是近战，土属性是远程等，可以感觉到制作组在这里有花点心思，不是随便换换颜色又多出一种属性。战斗主要分为攻击魔法和支援魔法2种类型。支援魔法像是在放技能，需要一定的冷却时间才能再度使用。攻击可以当做成普攻使用，还细分为3种攻击方式，好比土属性可以切换成机枪、撒烂枪、护盾。不过玩家同时只能装备一招支援和攻击，所以要打出连续技就需要不停的切换招式。网上就有不少大神分享自己快速切招的炫技影片。然而对我来说最大的问题是招式之间没有连锁反应，属性叠加也没有加成效果，敌人又经常打断出招，导致我玩到最后干脆把所有的支援魔法全部无脑放一轮，再用普通攻击收尾。跑酷方面做得很流畅，玩家可以攀墙、飞越峡谷，跑酷还能用来开宝箱、开门、跳过敌人等等。之后还会解锁瞬移的新能力，这些都非常棒。但 Forspoken 却偏偏要加入体力值来限制移动，让你动不动就得慢下来恢复体力，要不然就是捡地上的魔力来快速补充。不光如此，这游戏的世界还设计的超级空泛，就连画面也荒凉无比。只有在城镇有 NPC， 外头除了打怪就是跑图，路上没有任何有趣的事件和故事可以触发。地图跟其他主流的开放世界差不多，显示着各式各样的任务和活动。虽然乍看之下有很多选择，但玩起来没有什么不同，就是让你到个地图各处打怪。最好笑的是，有2个任务居然还叫你到同一个地方打怪，凑数的感觉非常强烈。游戏也没有任何实际有趣的支线可做，大部分支线都是让你跟着猫咪走，走一段路后就能找到道具。你完成了追虎斑猫1，就可以玩追虎斑猫2；完成追黑白猫1，就可以再追灰猫1。流程几乎一致，以此类推，感觉就是在刻意拉长你的游戏时间，超级敷衍。作为一款 RPG 游戏 ，Forspoken 的装备系统真的做得不够好，从头到尾完全没有动力想去升级或是换装。 身上能装的就只有披风和项链，虽然可以透过升级和安装模组来进行强化，但即便做了这些改变，也很难在战斗中感觉到实际的提升。外观的改变也仅限于背上的披风，没有其他更显眼的装饰来衬托主角逐渐增强的战斗力。任务的奖励也不怎么样，有些是给你文献让你多了解这个世界的魔宠，其实就是头上长角的小猫嘛，要不然就是送你经验值和素材。最偷懒的莫过于提升完全无感的能力数值。
Boring.
Forspoken 在发售前就因言情和画面缩水，导致它的卖相越来越差。虽然游戏性有可取之处，尤其是跑酷和战斗系统有点潜力，但糟糕的优化、毫无创新的开放世界、难以共鸣的角色，让它成为 Square Enix 又一款中庸之作。也许大家早在发售前就调整好对 Forspoken 的期待，所以并没有太多人因此感到失望。然而，更让大家担心的则是 SE 即将要在今年推出的 FF16。好的，今天影片就到这边啦。想知道为什么玩家和书迷都这么嫌弃巫师 Netflix 影集，可以去看一下我之前制作的影片，或者想了解万众期待的哈利波特3A 大作为什么还没上市就到抵制，可以去看一下我这支影片。那我是生菜，我们下部影片见，拜拜。
Thanks Keeps for sponsoring this video.
I have done many experiments. Even though something sometimes is a fail, we always learn something new. Today is no different because you asked for this and I'm not gonna let you down. Today, the 1-month chicken dry age experiment. Let's begin.
And everything starts off with chicken. This is a regular chicken. There's nothing special to it. I just got it at my supermarket. Now you all have asked me to dry age chicken because that's what it's done in Japan. But not only do they dry age chicken, they also eat them raw. Yes, raw chicken. However, I am not sure about that one. So to dry age the birds, the first thing I'm gonna do is to tie up the legs. Then using a hook, I can hang them on my dry ager so that they can dry up. In Japan, as far as I know, they have dry aged chicken up to 45 days. I'm not going that far because after 2 weeks, take a look. That's what it looks like. This thing is getting nice and dark and it is bone dry. The breast is impressive and so far there's no off smell. It seems to be just fine. So I went ahead and moved it to the side and added another chicken in there. This one I'll be letting it dry age for 2 weeks. And the first one is going to be for 30 days. But I decided to go even farther and dry aged one for 3 days. As in the end results, this is what I was left with. You can see that the skin got a little bit dry, which is what you want. Dry skin means crispy skin. That is a good thing. The wings, as expected, since it does not have a lot of meat, it dry out quite quickly. And here's the one for 2 weeks. I mean, take a look at the difference. It is much drier. The meat throughout the whole thing got a lot darker. And honestly, it looks fantastic. But there's one thing that is a little sketchy. That would be the smell. It is difficult to explain, as it's a mix of dry-aged meat, sourness, bitterness, and sweet. I know that sounds weird, but that is what it smells like. So I have no idea what to expect with this one. And here's the one that was dry aged for a month. This one is much drier, but you can clearly see there were some spots that was not dry aged. At the same time, I think this is one of the reasons they call this dark meat. The breast, on the other hand, there's not much differences from the previous one. And one thing that surprised me the most is that this one does not smell bad. It actually has no smell whatsoever. So right at this point, I got really excited to find out how it was gonna taste. However, this thing is bone dry. Adding seasoning to it is just a complete nightmare. I mean, take a look. Everything just falls off, and I did not want to get the skin wet. If I did so, I would lose the crispiness. So the next thing I thought was to go ahead and add some brine solution into it. However, if I did that, it would modify the flavor. And since we went to so much trouble to dry age this thing, the last thing I want is to see some off flavor from a brine. So I decided to go ahead and cook it unseasoned. Outside we went into my smoker. So I went ahead and set my smoker to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. Threw my chickens in there and I was excited to find out what was gonna happen. And after about an hour, the internal temperature of 165 degrees Fahrenheit was reached. And I mean, take a look at this one. The skin is extremely crispy. It's perfectly cooked. As I open it up, it just smells fantastic. And the breast is extremely juicy. Now here's the one that was dry aged for 15 days. This one is a completely different story, even though they look quite similar. As soon as I opened it up, oh boy, the smell that came out of this thing is not good. I immediately quit right there. It's just way too potent to continue. Lastly, we have the one that was dry aged for over a month. This one does not smell that bad right now. So I went ahead and grabbed my knife and started to open it. And as soon as I did, everything went south. And I literally mean everything.
Houston, we've had a problem.
What do you guys think about this experiment? And before we try it, I want to thank today's sponsor, Keeps. Yes, I know what you're thinking. It is too late for me. But it is not too late for you, my friends. You still have time. And with Keeps, you get to keep your hair. With Keeps, you get affordable, personalized, expert-recommended hair loss treatments that are clinically proven to stop hair loss and improve hair growth. You don't need to visit a doctor's office or pharmacy. Plans are recommended by a licensed medical provider. And the best part, everything is delivered directly to your door. And if you have questions, no worries, they have 24/7 care and support with a network of expert medical advisors, prescribers, and specialists to support you keeping that hair. So whether you're looking to prevent hair loss, stimulate hair growth, or just take better care of the hair you have, Keeps has you covered. Hair loss stops with Keeps. To get 50% off your first order, go to keeps.com/GugaFoods or just click the link on the description. That's KEEPS.com/GugaFoods. Thank you, Keeps, for sponsoring this video. But now let's get right back to this insane experiment. All right, everybody. Today we got our chicken. As you guys can see, I'm not excited whatsoever.
Guga, I think
We're doing this for science.
Guga, there's nothing scientific about this. This is really, really bad, guys. If I had to describe the smell that we're smelling right now, it's kind of like a mix between fresh, like hot, nasty garbage and like radioactive waste. It's somewhere in the middle. It's putrid, it's disgusting, it hurts my soul, it's not good.
Putrid is definitely the word. I was hungry, I'm not eating.
Something went terribly wrong, everybody. I don't know what went wrong. I will say this, the regular one is fine. We can take a bite on it right now, but regardless of what it is, the other two are so extremely potent. It is unappetizing to even try this one. Would you guys like to try this one?
Yeah, no.
I don't, I'm good.
This one right here is only dry aged for 1 day though. This one's fine. This is one of those experiments that I like to say that I like to do to learn things because you guys requested me to dry age chicken for this long. I've even heard that they do this in Japan. They must do something completely different than what I do because this went terribly wrong. One of the most interesting thing for me is that this one right here that was dry aged for 2 weeks, it smells worse than the one that it was dry aged for a month. By the way, this is a dry age experiment.
What I have learned is the equivalent of dry aging a steak for a chicken is barbecue sauce.
Yes.
That's what I've learned.
I want to ask you guys something, right? The audience knows how much we can eat sitting here where we're sitting right now, smelling these smells. Are any of you guys hungry?
No.
Nah.
And I'll be honest with you, I have not eaten nothing the whole day.
Yeah, I was pretty hungry coming into this.
This one bring me vibes of the 1 month brisket that I cooked on.
Oh.
Was very, very rotten. This is not safe to eat. We're not trying it. I hope that he answers anyone's question that asks us to give this a try because this is not a good idea. Highly recommend you not even doing this.
Is this the first experiment that we don't eat?
Yes.
It is for me.
After so many crazy, insane experiments that I have done on this channel here in GugaFoods, this is the very first one. We're not eating, everybody. It is not safe. Let me know in the comments down below if you guys know why this happened. Please put it down. We all want to learn why poultry is not a good thing to dry age for such a long time. What went wrong, how it went wrong. I'm sure you guys are way smarter than me and you will know what happened. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, be sure to subscribe.
After years perfecting it, it's finally available for purchase. Guga's Rub. My rub has been the go-to for many of you, and now this new revamped formula is better than ever. It's amazing on beef, pork, lamb, chicken, and my favorite, burgers. This rub is what I use in 90% of everything I cook. Get yours now at shop.gugafoods.com. The link will be on the description.
Guga's Rub, baby. Get yours now at shop.gugafoods.com. The link will be on the description. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the next one. Take care, buddy. Bye-bye.
We're here at Joint Seafood, and what we have in front of us is a $10,000 dry aged tuna. Now, I was told that there's a cut on this tuna that literally tastes like a steak, so we're gonna put that to the test. But first, as you can see, this place is absolutely ridiculous. We need to check this place out. Okay, guys, we are here in LA. This is America's only dry aged fish shop. I'm pretty pumped to check it out. Let's go. What is up, Weiwei? It is so great to finally meet you. The man, the myth, the legend, the owner of the Joint Seafood Market. Okay, so you guys have seen me do some dry aging at my house. It's all thanks to this guy. So realistically, how many fish do you think you have in this shop?
I think fully loaded, we're 4,000 pounds.
And so you have a saying that fresh is born. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
You know, I grew up fishing, so I've had access to a lot of fresh fish, and it was always very predictable.
So when it comes to aged fish, what are the major benefits, would you say?
Before aging happens, we condition the fish to be better in texture, flavor, aroma, everything. It's gonna taste a lot cleaner. You won't taste the impurities, the blood, the slime. So we're actually making fish less fishy.
That is huge because nobody wants a fishy fish. Okay, so why don't we start by just checking out some of these fish?
Yeah, so we have some branzinos, barramundi, bluefin tuna. Over here we have some steelhead salmon, amberjack, some more black cod and king salmon over here. Those are sea breams.
Look at that organization. It's just like immaculately clean and they're just lined up. Fully gutted.
Fully scaled.
So Tsukibiki is one of those things that we attempted back in our own kitchen. The final important step is to move our knife against the fish like so to open those ducts. I'm not gonna call it the biggest success in the world, but we did kind of go through the process. So one of the huge benefits to the Tsukibiki method, along with dry aging fish, is that you have an extremely dry exterior on that skin, and it leads to the most insanely crispy and almost like puffy skin. Now, one thing that I've seen Li Wei do quite a bit, look what he does here. He basically adds things to the cavity of the fish, opens them up, and allows perfect circulation to occur. And as you can see on these salmon, we have these beads of fat. They almost look like teardrops coming out of the fish.
So those beads that you see over there, so as the fish reduces its moisture, it starts sweating beads of fat.
I wish I could do that. Lose a little bit of weight, sweat some beads of fat. That'd be great. Moving over here, we have probably one of the most unique fish I've ever seen. I thought they were flounder. Apparently they're turbo. These must be bottom feeders then, right?
Yep.
So what would you say the ideal length of time to dry age? Like for example, branzino.
So there's no ideal length of time. There's an ideal weight loss, 15%, depending on fish, some 10, and that also has to do with fat ratio content.
Something I'm very happy about. But of course, my man Li Wei has some beef for us.
This is prime ribeye, bone in, and that's Japanese Wagyu.
Okay, so we've seen a lot of very cool fish, but now we're getting into the crazy stuff. Have you ever seen a salmon, one, that big, but also that shape? That thing is thick. So Ora King salmon are some of the most sought after salmon in the entire world. Ora King Tai, which means Ora King Chief. These particular fish have a genetic anomaly where they literally don't stop growing and they get to these absurd sizes. I mean, how big is this thing?
Mid-40s.
So a typical salmon will get to like 15 pounds. This thing is like triple that. Okay guys, and last but not least, we have the big kahuna, the big tuna, whatever you want to call it. This is the most prized dry aged fish I have ever seen in my entire life. This piece here comes from a bluefin tuna. And as you can see, there's several parts to the anatomy. Here we have that beautiful, rich, dark red akami, which is typically what we see when it comes to tuna sashimi. Down over here, we have the chutoro, which is the medium fatty tuna. And lastly, over here, we have the otoro. This stuff is literally the best of the best. It's pretty much like Wagyu A5, but for a tuna. But what I'm most excited about is this part right here. Now, it might not look like much right now, but this bloodline with the fat and the skin, that area right there, allegedly tastes like a steak. So literally any tuna over 200 pounds.
Fishermen like to call it a cow.
So that's technically a cow. All right, we're having beef for dinner. Okay, so we've seen some fish, but it's time for a little challenge. It's time to find out if Dry Aged Fish Guy is truly the fish master. So over here, Li Wei has probably a dozen branzino. I myself have about one. We're gonna do a little filleting and see who's faster. So Li Wei was kind enough to let me look at his personal knife roll. And the first challenge is figuring out what knife to use. He's not giving me any insight on what the right knife is, so here we go. I mean, these definitely look like knives. No I don't know, I'm gonna trust my gut and just go with this guy. I've chosen my wand. Am I way off?
Yeah, way off, but you can use it if you want. I'll just grab this one right here.
What is this knife actually used for?
For slicing sashimi.
The goal here is to remove the fillet, leave obviously as much flesh as possible on the fish. By the end of this, I need 2 beautiful fillets.
I have a sense that Max is nervous.
3, 2, 1, go. Shit, oh my god, that angle is completely off. Guys, what are you doing over there?
I'm just preparing all my fish to fillet.
I don't know if I'm going from the right side. Oh my god, I went through the back one.
Dude, how are you feeling right now?
Just cutting fish, just like any other day.
Oh my god, he's already filleting them. What? I thought he was still on the head. We're selling these fish later, right?
Yeah.
I need moral support right now. This is not done.
Okay.
How are we looking quality-wise? First, realistically, what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to my 1. So you're 6 times faster than me at filleting fish. How's the quality of mine now?
I can't sell that.
This is one of his. This is one of mine. Yours like fully follows the backbone. I did leave a lot of meat on there. Smells remarkably clean. Doesn't smell like no funky, weird, fishy smells. It's a little more firm, I would say. There it is. Leeway's better at filleting fish than me. So it's time to move on to the next step, and it's easily the step I'm most excited about. We are going to actually slice into one of these hunks of tuna. So this right here is quarter of a 600-pound tuna. I mean, that piece right there goes for well over $10,000.
God, it's heavier than you think, right? Park it right here.
Okay, and it is finally time to slice into our giant hunk of tuna. Now, after my last performance with the knife, oh my God, I went through the backbone. Unfortunately, I'm not allowed to slice things anymore in this shop, so we're gonna let Leeway do the honors, but just check this thing out real quick. As you can see, there is a pellicle, kind of similar to what you'll find with beef, a little bit less hard, but this is what, dry aged for, you said, like 30 days?
Just a little over 2 weeks.
Fairly standard for tuna, right? We have that more red meat, that akami up here, and then towards the back, we have the holy grail. This stuff is, it's called Otoro, the best of the best. I am extremely excited to slice into this thing. Is that all one motion?
The idea of it is supposed to be one motion.
Oh my God. You just went right through that.
Yeah. So this is the Otoro, Jutoro, Akami, and that's that bloodline.
This is the fish steak. Yeah.
If I age tuna correctly, the pellicle is very, very thin. This coloration here is like perfect red. That's like literally like maybe a millimeter in the pellicle.
Right.
That's when it's done right. Nothing on here is decomposing.
So this Toro section is easily the most prized part of the tuna, but for today's experiment, we're actually focusing on this area right here, which is part of the bloodline. And Leeway tells me it tastes similar to a steak. The only way to find out is to do a little side-by-side comparison. So what we're gonna do is grill up some of this dry-aged tuna, compare it to a real steak to find out how similar they could possibly be. That comes right off. All right, so more of the fat here, and then getting into that lean meat. It doesn't look like a bloodline though. Like you mentioned New York strip, very similar just visually. We have that fattier area right here, gets into the lean section.
Leeway spent the next few minutes breaking down that bloodline into both leaner and more fatty sections.
Removing the pellicle.
Now usually the bloodline has an overly fishy taste, but with tuna of this quality, it apparently not only tastes great, but also tastes like a steak. But to say I was skeptical at this point would be an understatement.
So are you going against the grain here?
For this, it really doesn't really matter.
We're grilling this, right?
Yeah, there's like 3 cuts here. I think that's gonna taste just like that fat cat on the New York. This is gonna be like tasting a lot like the filet, and this here probably tastes texturally more like the ribeye.
So we have the fatty, the lean, and the in-between. And of course, the real steak. Okay, so over here we have our 3 pieces of dry-aged tuna. We have our real steak, we have our charcoal getting lit up. Let's do this. We're actually gonna season these with a Montreal steak seasoning to really give them that steaky feel.
All right, let's grill them up.
Leeway placed the tuna as well as the real steak on the grill, and for this searing step, we used high-quality Binchotan charcoal. It generates really high heat with a distinctive clean char flavor. Now, he was the one who claimed that this tuna tastes like beef, so I let him do the honors with the cooking. What I noticed is that he was really focusing on the sear on one side, allowing him to get a super strong crust.
So I'm not gonna lie, visually at this point, they look extremely similar. But what matters most is the taste. Okay, so our chef has left us with 4 beautiful looking steaks. Unfortunately, I don't have my taste test tied, but we do have this guy right here, which should work perfect. Let's do this. Now, once again, the question here is, can I tell the difference between the tuna and the beef? Number 1. I know for a fact that that is tuna. That is absolutely spectacular. Which one was that?
That was this right here.
Is that the fat part?
That's usually the part that is discarded. It's the bloodline.
Right.
It doesn't sell. That's what my butchers eat. They eat well.
Typically on a strip, you kind of have that like little layer of fat over the top. Totally got that. In terms of flavor, it is extremely clean. Typically when you eat really high fat content tuna, very creamy, but you don't get that crust. In this case, it's super crunchy, but you still get that smoothness from all the fat. Okay, number 2. Okay, so this is definitely the steak. It's so crazy though how similar it is.
The resemblances are striking.
So at the end of the day, yes, we could tell the difference between the beef and the tuna, but I have to say that was by far the meatiest tuna I have ever had in my life, and it was incredible. So thank you so much to Leeway. I really hope you guys enjoyed the video. Again, if you are in LA, be sure to check this place out, and I'll see you next time.
I'm gonna be cooking non-stop for the next 24 hours straight. And during that time, I'll teach you everything I know about cooking. By the end of this video, you'll have the tools to go out and cook anything you want. We'll start with simple but important topics, such as choosing the best equipment and ingredients you should have at home. Then we'll move on to a few basic techniques, such as making brown butter or doing a simple stir fry. And eventually, we'll move on to more exciting and complex dishes, such as shrimp scampi, buttermilk fried chicken, or steak with a red wine reduction sauce. All of this and more is in my new cookbook. This book right here will help you get to the next level. I'll sign a few of the copies for anyone who orders from the link in the description below. And for every pre-order that we get, we're going to donate 10 meals to those in need through the Farming Project. It is currently 12:00 p.m. on the dot. Let's jump into our first lesson. First up, ingredients and equipment. And make sure to take notes because for me, these are must-have things in your kitchen. The most basic and important tool in cooking is an 8-inch chef's knife. It's the most well-rounded knife you're going to find. I'll explain a bit more later about my philosophy behind knives, but all you need is an 8-inch chef's knife and a sharpener. And if you've ever stepped foot in a kitchen, I'm sure you've seen something that looks like this. This is called a honing rod. It's not a knife sharpener. What this does is allow the sharpness on the knife to last longer. It doesn't make it any sharper. As you cut, the bottom of the knife will flatten out and this will pull it back together, but only for so long. Eventually, you'll need to sharpen. Naturally, you'll need something to cut on, which is why I suggest getting a big, nice, heavy wood cutting board. There is some care and maintenance involved, and we'll go into that later, but it's well worth it. I'd also recommend a dishwasher-safe cutting board for cutting any raw meats, fish, poultry, because that way you're not dirtying up this wood cutting board as you cook. To go with every cutting board, you should get a bench scraper. This lets you keep it nice and clean as you cook, and it also comes in handy for a variety of other things, especially with making dough. It's definitely good to splurge on a nice cast iron skillet, but as long as you have one stainless steel pan and a non-stick pan, you should be in good shape. If you plan on cooking lots of meats where you need to reach an internal temperature to make sure it's food safe, you're going to want an instant read thermometer. They come in all shapes and sizes, so just get one that has good reviews. You're also going to want a microplane grater, which is going to help with things like citrus zest and cheese, and what's called a box grater, which I'm sure you've probably seen before. I like to have one of each, especially so I don't have to dirty up my entire box grater when I want to use the small function, and instead can just whip out the microplane. If you're going to be making stocks, soups, and even things like rice before you cook it, you're going to want a fine mesh strainer. This one right here is called the chinois, and you can use it for any type of straining, but the great thing is, if you make something like a soup, you can get it really silky and smooth when you pass it through. To finish with equipment, a few classic tools you've probably heard of, such as a metal whisk, a nice and sturdy metal spatula, a pair of metal tongs, which I definitely can't live without in the kitchen, then a nice rimmed baking sheet fitted with a wire rack. This is great for baking, of course, but also for resting hot things after you cook them, such as fried chicken or steak. And last but not least, other what I would call optional appliances. Think a high-powered blender, a butane torch, which is super fun to use, a rice cooker, definitely one of my favorites, and really any other specific equipment you might want. When it comes to ingredients, it's important that you have two different types of oil. First is a high-heat cooking oil. A lot of people use peanut oil, but that can get pretty expensive, so I stick with a simple vegetable oil. And I use enough of it that I buy it in bulk and then stick it in these nice squeeze bottles. The second, olive oil, but make sure it's only extra virgin. That's going to be the purest, highest quality olive oil you can find, and you can cook with it, but don't go above low to medium temperatures. I prefer to use olive oil as a finishing oil after the food has been cooked. I myself probably buy way too much butter, but it's an important ingredient when it comes to cooking, and you should taste a bunch of different ones to find the brand you like the best. If you want that butter flavor when you cook but don't want it to burn at high temperatures, get yourself some clarified butter. Right here I have a jar of ghee, so if I go and make something like pancakes, I can use the clarified butter the whole time and it's not going to burn. It's got a much higher smoke point than regular butter. Then of course we have salt, and just like oil, I would suggest you get two types. You can look at kosher salt as your all-purpose salt, sort of like the vegetable oil, and then the nicer flaky salt as your finishing salt, kind of like olive oil. When it comes to seasonings, that's totally up to you. I probably have 400 or 500 seasonings in my kitchen here, and that's just to say how much variety there is. When it comes to pantry staples such as mayonnaise, mustard, soy sauce, ketchup, all those come down to preference as well. I found my favorites just by tasting a bunch of different things, and I'd encourage you to do the same. I use a lot of zest when I cook because it gives the most potent flavor when it comes to citrus, so I always have things like lemon, orange, and lime around. The same way you shouldn't waste a crust on a pizza, don't waste the zest in your citrus. If you want your cooking and food to be fresh, try to keep as many fresh herbs as you can. Wrap these lightly in damp paper towels, throw them in a plastic bag, and keep them in the fridge. They'll last so much longer that way, and I'm telling you right now that one of the easiest things to take your food to the next level is get fresh herbs. When it comes to cheese, never ever buy it freshly grated, unless you absolutely have to. Instead, just buy your cheese in a block, and that way you can grate it yourself, it'll melt even better, and it doesn't come with all those starchy chemicals in the bag either. Last up is a good old rotisserie chicken. I like these because of how versatile they are, but this is more of a preference than anything. I just think that for the price, they're super convenient and they can go a really long way when it comes to cooking. Looks like it's 1 o'clock, time for the next lesson.
Nick's letting me and a couple of other special guests introduce a couple topics throughout the video. Next up is knife skills. They're so important that when I interviewed to be Nick's cameraman, he tested out my knife skills.
When it comes to knife skills, they're very important and they certainly don't have to be intimidating. The first step is to get yourself a nice 8-inch chef's knife and a simple sharpener. There's no need for one of those giant knife blocks. This is practically the only knife I touch in the kitchen, to the point that I have a drawer full of only chef's knives and nothing else. When it comes to cutting, the first thing to do is to secure your work surface that you're cutting on. The way I do that is simply by adding a damp paper towel right under the board, and that way it shouldn't move around as I cut. Next is the proper way we hold our knife. This right here is incorrect. You have much less control, and you'll never see a properly trained chef holding a chef's knife like this. What we do is called the pinch grip. Simply take your index finger and thumb and bring it right across the knife like this, where you're pinching the base of the blade of the knife. Then your other 3 fingers should fall naturally behind the handle, and what this will do is make the blade an extension of your hand and arm. Use an empty cutting board and simply do a few practices with slicing your knife. Once you've mastered the way to hold the knife, the next thing I want to talk about is our other hand, the hand that's going to hold the food you'll be cutting. Make it a practice to never ever have your fingers straight out like this. You always want to be making a claw shape with your hand. That goes for anything, anytime you're cutting. The easiest way to spot a beginner is when their hand is like this or like this when cutting. This right here is eventually going to chop a finger off. Instead, if you're using this claw method, keeping that middle finger as the frontmost part that's guiding your knife, you can use it as a guide and you have a much less likely chance of actually cutting your hand. And on top of this, it really does help as a guide to get those perfect knife cuts. You'll also notice that when I cut, I'm not chopping the knife down like this. Instead, I'm rolling the knife forward with each cut. And if sharp, the knife should glide straight through the object you're cutting. We have plenty of exciting things to get through today, and I want to actually start applying these principles to real food soon, but I'll practice just a bit more on this onion so you can see a bit more of the cutting in action.
Nick, want to hear a fun fact?
No.
You know that onions have 5 times the DNA that humans have?
Using that claw method, I'll slice through the onion, chop off just that top section, and using that rocking motion going forward like I showed you before, we'll gently and carefully get those nice slices of onion. And since I have my finger as a guide, they should be nice and thin and uniform, just like that. There are a variety of different knife cuts that you might hear: small dice, medium dice, large dice, mince, julienne, brunoise, chiffonade. My philosophy is that you can learn these if you want, but at the same time, as long as you know how to use a knife, don't let all of these different terms make cooking confusing for you. If you can cut, you can cut. It's all there is to it. Which brings us to 2 o'clock, time for the next lesson.
We're moving on to brown butter. It's delicious and it allows you to turn butter into something completely new. It's so nutty and fragrant, but it could certainly be a challenge. Just make sure you focus carefully and you get it golden like me.
It took me a long time to learn to make perfect brown butter every time. It's actually something I learned from my grandmother. You have to have a perfect sense of timing and also residual heat, meaning even when you turn off the heat, the pan's still going to be hot, continuing to cook whatever's in there. All of this has to be taken into account when you're cooking, whether it's butter, chicken, a steak, or anything else. And the reason I like butter is because the butter doesn't lie. If it's perfect golden brown, it's perfect golden brown. There's no in between. The first step is to fire up the heat and add in that butter. If you're being really precise, you can chop the butter up into small bits, because that'll help it melt and brown more evenly, but I've been doing it for long enough that I just throw the whole stick in there. Let it melt over medium or low. I also like something like brown butter because it forces you to focus. You can't walk off and go on your phone. You really have to be present and focusing on what's happening at all times. As it begins to melt, you want to make sure you're constantly moving things around so that nothing sticks and burns. There are many times in cooking where you don't want to be touching anything, and you actually want the food to stick and start to get darker and darker golden brown, such as cooking a steak where you want to leave it and get that nice crust. But because butter is so fine and delicate, it can burn fast enough that you have to be constantly moving it around. What we're actually going to be doing in here is browning the milk solids. If you've ever burned butter, which I'm sure you have, you've seen those little black specks once you burn it, and that's what we're trying to toast right now. But instead of it burning, we're trying to get it perfectly nutty, toasted, and golden brown. When it really starts to foam up like this is when you know you're close. The key is moving things around and trying to see through to the bottom, and the second you see it get light golden brown, take it and toss it off to the side. As I pour it, you should see those beautiful golden brown bits falling as the last thing. Those are the milk solids. And as tempted as I am to just drink this as is, you can save this for so many different uses in cooking, some of which we're gonna do later today. And as I lift some up and pour it out like this, you should see that even minutes after it's been cooked, it's perfectly golden brown. If you can teach yourself to make consistently perfect brown butter, it'll help you to understand a lot more than just that in food. By the way, this is just a few hours later, and this is what brown butter looks like after it's been cooled in the fridge. In this section, I want to cook one more thing, toasted pine nuts. Just again to show how you can easily transform the flavor of an ingredient, but also really focusing to make sure you heat it up perfectly and not too much. But before we do that, since that does require tossing the pan like this, I'm going to teach you what's called the sauté snap, not using pine nuts because they're way too expensive to practice with, but using cheese balls. I'm sure you've seen someone doing this at some point, perfectly tossing up vegetables in a pan or whatever else it might be, and it's a skill that you must have in the kitchen. I'll pour in just a few of my cheese balls, covering the bottom of the pan. I love cheese balls. And then it's all about confidence and flicking your wrist. You can definitely start slower, but the goal is to flip the cheese balls over onto themselves each time, with the idea being that if you had something in here that was being cooked, you'd constantly be hitting all sides of it. You can also practice with two hands if you'd like, especially since some pans can be quite heavy, but try getting that motion down with something that's cheap and inexpensive like cheese balls. Then, once you've gotten experience, you can work your way on up to nicer ingredients. And then all we're left with is introducing the heat.
To everyone watching this, you gotta know how to make a good soup and a good salad. You don't, you really better get it together, because it's a life skill that's even easier than tying your shoes or counting to 10. It's 3 p.m. I'm sending you some kick-ass vibes. Get going!
I want to talk about soup and salad together because they're both very simple, which means there's no excuses when it comes to making them delicious. The way I think about them both is balance, and that's a key word in thinking about food as a whole. You need to think about temperatures, textures, flavors, salt, sweetness, acid, seasonality. There are just so many factors that come into play when you think about food, and especially in something as basic as a soup or a salad, you have to make sure you're using all of those to make the best dish that you can. To start with our salad, it's always good to know how to make a simple vinaigrette, and typically that's about 3 parts oil. Here I'm using olive oil to 1 part vinegar. I'm using red wine vinegar. That means if you have 3 tablespoons of oil, you'll have 1 tablespoon of vinegar. After that, I'll add a pinch of salt, a light drizzle of honey, and just a pinch of pepper. Then, whether you're doing this in a mortar and pestle like me, or in a blender, you want to keep mixing until it's emulsified, meaning it looks like one consistent mixture. Like I said, we're going for a bunch of different textures and flavors, so I'll start with some simple romaine lettuce, which is nice and light and crispy, a great base for my salad. I even like to think of factors such as color when cooking. If I want peppers in my salad, it's going to be much more appetizing if I have a variety of colors in it. And again, you want to have the same mindset for soup. Even adding something like a little swirl of cream to the top will add not only flavor, but also a nice inviting color on the top of the soup you're about to enjoy. I think we can all agree that this doesn't look quite as good as this. To assemble our salad, I'll add in some of those greens, then toss in some of those peppers, a nice sprinkle of toasted pine nuts, a nice grating of Parmesan cheese. This, by the way, will give us some nice salt, a nice drizzle of our dressing. Man, you want to taste?
Yeah, sure.
You good?
It's actually really good, yeah.
And then to finish, a few of these crostini, which I find to be a lot better than croutons, and I'll break over the top of my salad. That last touch will give us different sizes and textures so that no bite of the salad is the same. You might get a red pepper with a piece of lettuce and a large crostini, or you might get a piece of lettuce with a light coating of cheese, some toasted pine nuts, and some breadcrumbs. You have to keep your food exciting.
Hey there, I'm Kevin from Cook. So since there are quite a few veggies left over from the salad, let's learn how to stir fry. Now, I've made a lot of stir fries. They're very simple and definitely delicious. I always stress the importance of learning the art of stir frying, but I'll let Nick take it from here.
Whether you're a college student, you just have some scraps in your fridge at home, or you just want to make a nice quick meal, a stir fry is always the way to go. That or fried rice, which we'll go into later. The great part about a stir fry, you can use whatever ingredients you want. As I said earlier, I like to have a prep board separate from my wood cutting board. So for things like garlic and onions, when I put them down on here and chop them all up, we have perfectly minced garlic, and that flavor isn't going to stay in our cutting board. Same goes for the onion. Start with a nice wok, or really any pan you want. We'll go into the bottom with just a little bit of oil. You want something that has a high smoke point because we're going to cook fast and at a high temperature. First, you want to add in your aromatics, such as the garlic and the onions, the things that are going to really give us that foundational flavor. Stir those around just a bit, adjusting the heat as necessary so they don't burn. And I want you to understand that we wouldn't start with something like a pepper because they'd be all wilted and overcooked by the time we're finished cooking our stir fry. Next up, I have some thinly sliced chicken that I'll toss in. But you can use anything you want here, whether it's chicken, steak, shrimp, or even a vegetarian stir fry. As I cook here, I'm also adjusting the heat up and down as I go because I don't want the garlic and onion to burn. Just like we had to do with the brown butter, you need to focus. Always be on the lookout for that ingredient that could burn first, and just adjust the heat to prevent that from happening. At this point, my chicken is cooked through, so I'm gonna add in some of my peppers from that last lesson, and I'll stir this up just a little bit. As you can see, I'm still using that flicking technique. Once those peppers are lightly softened, although I like to keep mine nice and crunchy, I'll add in a little bit of rice wine vinegar. That is gonna give us the acidity to balance out this dish, as well as a nice splash of soy sauce. That's gonna give us flavor and also the salt that we desperately need. Notice we haven't added any salt until just now. Use these liquids to scrape off all those delicious bits on the bottom of your pan, which are also gonna have tons and tons of flavor. And to finish things off, I'm gonna make what's called a cornstarch slurry. I'm just gonna add a bit of cornstarch to some water, and when it's nice and consistent, I'll drop that right into my stir fry. That cornstarch will thicken up all the liquid in our stir fry and give us a nice, beautiful glaze. It essentially brings your sauce together. Transfer that right away into a bowl, and just take note of that beautiful glaze that we got from the cornstarch and soy sauce and vinegar at the end. This took me no more than just a couple minutes, and I guarantee you, watching this right now, could easily go home and make this. Anytime, anywhere. Oh, 5 o'clock. Time for our next lesson. I'm gonna let Gordon introduce this one.
Now, to be a true master chef, you have to be able to take a stunning bird like this and break it down into all its delicious parts.
After Gordon taught us this, which as you can see I was pretty excited about, I've actually done it several times with a blindfold on. But today I'm gonna guide you through it a bit slower, without a blindfold. Don't try to learn with a blindfold on. Learning how to break down a whole chicken is really important. I'm not saying you have to do it every day, but it'll teach you where all the individual parts of the chicken come from, and you can apply this to many other parts of cooking. To begin, pat your chicken dry. You don't want liquids flying out everywhere as you butcher it. Lay it down on your cutting board, breast side up, and it may look confusing right now, but after we get through a few cuts, you'll start to understand it right away. You're gonna make an incision just to cut the skin inside each leg. That's just gonna help you to see inside for what we're gonna do next. Do that same thing on the other side. Once you've separated that skin and can clearly see inside both of the legs and thighs, you can turn the chicken towards you and holding down the breast, put your whole hand around the thigh and leg on one side and lift and crack. What you're looking to do is dislocate this one bone right here that comes out of the thigh. And after you've done that, you can easily fit your knife right inside there, close it back down, and make a nice cut straight through. And already, right there, we have one leg and one thigh. Flip the chicken around and do the same thing on the other side. Again, all you're looking for is that bone right there to pop out, after which you can fit in your knife and make a clean cut right through. 2 legs and 2 thighs. For the wings, you want to stretch them out like this, and then simply start carving around the wing with your knife, letting the weight of the chicken hang down and do all the work for you. Eventually, your knife should swiftly and easily cut right through that bone there, and just like that, you've taken off a wing. Do the same with the other side. Now, all we have left are the breasts. There's a bone straight through the middle that divides them for you. So all you have to do is start by following that bone on one side, then just continue cutting down, keeping the knife right up against the bone, then eventually you can open it up to give yourself a little bit more visibility and just keep driving the knife along the bone. The goal, of course, is to get as much meat as possible, and eventually off it'll come. And as you can see, there's one clean chicken breast. For the other side, just flip it around and once again, cut along the bone, and eventually you got your second chicken breast. And what you're left with is 2 breasts, 1 carcass, 2 wings, and 2 leg quarters, which includes both the leg and the thigh. And the best part, it's only 5:32. It's 6 o'clock, so we're gonna make stock. It's a great way to get rid of kitchen scraps, and once you know what scraps you can and can't use, it's just about one of the easiest things to make, but it's packed with flavor. To begin, you'll fill a pot just about 3/4 of the way with water. Then we'll go in with our mirepoix, which is simply carrots, celery, and onion. If you ever hear mirepoix, that's what it means. It's just a flavorful trio of those 3 classic vegetables that people use often in stocks and soups. And like I said, it's a good time to use leftovers. So here I have some parsley stems, then one of my favorite ingredients, a few Parmesan cheese rinds, and then in we go with the carcass of a cooked rotisserie chicken, and also the raw carcass of the chicken we just broke down. Then we'll crank up the heat and set it aside. You're gonna wanna check on it every 20 minutes or so and skim off all that foam that appears on the top. That's gonna give you a cloudy stock, and we don't want that. After that, we'll let it cook about 4 or 5 hours, and then we'll have a nice flavorful chicken stock using all these amazing scraps that we've saved up in our fridge from over time. I like to freeze all my scraps over several months and then make one big stock every so often. And you can use whatever bones you want, but make sure to stay away from bitter greens and veggies such as kale, cabbage, artichokes, bok choy. If in doubt, just look it up. And one last thing, don't salt your stock. You're gonna reduce it down at the end, which means we're gonna boil off and let a lot of the water escape, which concentrates the stock and gives us more powerful flavor in smaller amounts of stock. And it's easier for storage, but if you salt it now, it might become way too salty later. You wanna be able to control the seasoning when you go to cook with it. All right, we're doing our first cameraman swap of the night.
Good luck, Kevin. I'm out. I'm getting some sleep.
There are lots of sauces in cooking, but there are a few in particular that you must know. They're called the French mother sauces. And once you learn the foundations, you can apply it to just about anything you can imagine. And that's the beauty of sauces.
Our first sauce is a bechamel. It's the base for many of our favorite foods. Chicken pot pie, mac and cheese. It's a creamy foundational sauce. We'll start by melting down 2 tablespoons of butter. We're doing this over medium heat so the butter doesn't burn because we want to keep the color of the sauce nice and light and white. In with the butter, we're going to add 2 tablespoons of flour, and we're making right now what we call a roux. Turn the heat to low and stir constantly until it's evenly mixed up. Once the mixture starts to bubble, add in 1 1/4 cups of hot milk, continuing to whisk, and then you can turn up the heat and bring this to a boil, seasoning it with salt and pepper as it cooks. Once it's thickened up, I'll turn off the heat. As you can probably tell, this process happens pretty quickly. The flour just did exactly what we did earlier with the cornstarch in the stir fry. Any starch like that will thicken up a sauce, and that's how we just